Washington mornings on the Mall. 105.9 FM. And AM 630. WMAL.
7:07 on WMAL, the place where Washington comes to talk. I'm Brian Wynn. The guy sitting right over there, that handsome, swarthy guy, is Brian Neiman. How are you?
Are you profiling this morning? Is that what it is?
No, I'm not.
Sounds like it.
I'm not, but you are a swarthy guy. On the line right now is our good friend, a guy that we love and admire and respect, Joe DIGENOVA. But, Joe, last week you took a very strong position on the Trayvon Martin case. And I always, when you speak, I always listen. I mean, I always say, well, you know, the guy's a smart guy, and I need to listen to what he says. But as I learned more about the case after that conversation, and I thought more about it, I just came to the opinion that I may have to respectfully disagree. So first of all, do you still hold the position that the police and the prosecutors completely blew it in this case?
Yes, I do. And in fact, I spent the week actually analyzing in even more detail the available information. And the one thing that you cannot get away from is that very night, the lead senior detective involved in the case wanted to arrest, and he was overruled by the chief and later by the DA. Now, when your senior detective says there should be an arrest after having interviewed the person shooting the gun, that tells you something. Now, remember what I said. Yeah. I said he should have been arrested. I didn't say he should have been convicted. Mm-hmm. This is a legal process. If he had been arrested and there was more than probable cause to arrest him, we would not be where we are today. The truth is that someone interfered with the decision-making process and stopped it in its tracks. And,
right.
You know, as far as I'm concerned, let them investigate away. But the bottom line is this. The senior detective with over 20 years' experience wanted to arrest.
Well, let me just say a couple of things about that. First of all, your position last week was the moment he got out of the car, it was over as far as you were concerned.
That's correct.
But we now know, in listening to the 911 tapes and piecing together this thing, as you develop a timeline on this thing, we now know that he was already out of the car when the dispatcher told him, asked him, are you following him? And he said, yeah. He said, you don't need to do that.
I don't care.
And his argument, let me finish, Joe. Hang on. Let me finish. And at that point, he was headed back to the car when some type of confrontation took place, the details of which are a bit vague. So was he in the wrong when he was apparently going back to the car when this thing took place?
Well, as I said, once he got out of the car, everything changed. And the bottom line is this. If there was a reason, a grand jury will now have an opportunity to listen. Now, I assume that he is not going to testify. His lawyer would be out of his mind to put Zimmerman into the state grand jury. He will take the fifth, and I assume that this woman who's been appointed, who made the awful mistake, this woman who's been appointed special prosecutor, who made the awful mistake of giving a lengthy interview about the process, I don't know what possesses people in situations like this to have to talk. But the bottom line is, my opinion hasn't changed at all. But remember, I'm perfectly willing to let the grand jury do its work, and if that ends in no indictment, that's fine. But remember, the legal process was halted that night.
Well, hold it. The legal process was, you say he should have been arrested. I've seen pictures of him in handcuffs. He was arrested.
He was not arrested.
He was released.
He was taken into custody.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's illegal. Maybe it's a quibble. But I mean, when I can't leave, I feel like I'm under arrest.
Well, that's a different issue. Brian. He was not booked for a homicide.
Right.
He was taken into custody for questioning. It's automatic. When they put you in a cruiser, you're handcuffed. That's so that you can't beat the police officer over the head from the back seat.
Right.
He was handcuffed. He was not arrested because there is no arrest record of this. But by the way, as I said, I'm giving you my judgment about what happened that night. And what happened that night stinks. It just stinks. Not only that, when that senior detective, 20 years, says this is an arrest case and he is overruled, that raises real big problems.
But he was overruled after consultation with the state's attorney.
Well, that's fine. As I said, this is an opinion question. You can have your opinion. I got mine. The process is now working. I'm not against it. I'm for the process going forward. I love the fact that there's going to be a grand jury. I love to have citizens look at stuff like this. This is why we have grand juries.
All right. To me, Joe, it all boils down to the actual incident where they're fighting. Okay. What does George Zimmerman have the right to do? If does stand your ground apply in this particular case, and if it does, or if it does not apply to this case, and he is getting beat up by Trayvon Martin, what does he legally have to do in order to use deadly force? Because the law seems to suggest that he has to have a reasonable fear of bodily harm or death.
Well, I think if you believe his side of the story, then under the Florida
Which,
statute,
by the way, is corroborated by an eyewitness.
yes, and then uncorroborated by two more alleged eyewitnesses who are anonymous with local news stations. So that's why we have grand juries. They're all going to get a chance to testify. As far as Mr. Zimmerman, under the Florida statute, he has the right to use deadly force if he feels that he's in danger of death or serious bodily injury. The question is, was he really in danger? And did he have... That's for the jury. At this point, we have no way of knowing. No one knows what happened that night.
My biggest concern has always been in this particular case, and it's not just in this case, it's in other cases, is that you get in a fight with somebody, maybe you started, maybe you don't start it, but let's just say you do, you get the crap beat out of you, and then you shoot somebody dead, and then, hey, it's okay because, you were in fear of your life.
That is exactly right, and that's the problem with a broadly written stand-your-ground statute, which should have been limited to your business or your home where you can use a weapon. Once you are out on the street, and once you leave the protective environment of your car, as we now have seen repeatedly, anything can happen. Now, that doesn't mean that Mr. Zimmerman is guilty. It does mean that once he got out of the car, whether he was going back to his car or not, and we don't know, there are just all kinds of conflicting stories, there's only one thing we know for sure. Trayvon Martin is dead. George Zimmerman was armed, and he is alive.
All right, before we let you go, quickly, we don't have a lot of time left, but your thoughts on the Supreme Court hearings last week. You get any indication of which way this is going to go?
Well, you can never tell from arguments, but I think it was pretty clear that Justice Kennedy had very serious concerns about the broad overreach of using the Commerce Clause to force somebody into a market that didn't exist before and that the government was creating. I will say this. If you want to read one of the worst comments about the oral arguments, read yesterday's comments by Stephen Pearlstein in the Washington Post. This guy has gone absolutely nuts. An outrageous assault on Republican justices on the Supreme Court without a word about the leftward leanings of the other justices on the Democratic side. I mean, this guy started out a year ago criticizing the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit and has continued to harangue for over a year against Republican judges and justices. This guy has become unhinged. And this guy gets to print in the Washington Post. I commend his article to you for only one reason. It is a kind of Supreme Court derangement syndrome that has leaked its way into the liberal medium. And this guy, who used to be somewhat thoughtful, has now become a nutcase.
All right, Joe. It's always good to have
you. Eat your broccoli, Brian.
Hey, listen. This is a great place where we can respectfully disagree.
I love you, my brother.
And
my brother, I love you.
And we have
let's not go too far.
We can have an intelligent discussion, and we walk away at the end of the day, and we're still friends.
Yeah, just don't start your car without somebody else around.
See you, Joe.
Never argue with a guy named DIGENOVA.